Yo, hey, it's your boys, it's Anime Parley. Funny thing, so we posted a video on Instagram about Kaguya. We really just thought like it's a throwaway, you know what I mean? It's just kind of fun, just kind of talking about Kaguya and basically how it relates to Emu and kind of the relation between them and really kind of an unnecessary kind of add-in last-minute villain. And there was a lot of commentary on that. A lot of things were said. Sometimes positive, sometimes negative about that. So we're going to do a deep dive today and really kind of get into what we mean. Obviously, it's an Instagram short. There's not really that much that you can really kind of get into within a 1 minute video, but we do think it's necessary to really break this one down. So it's your boys, Killer Cam. I'll let the rest of the crew introduce myself, and then we're going to dive right in here.
What up, y'all? Peace and blessings. It's your boy, Mr. Wild and Free. I'm not walking today. I injured my leg. So sitting down for this episode.
Walking too much.
Much needed break.
What's up, y'all? It's your boy Moogie Mike. I'm also down. I'm a little sick.
Bash Ketchup here. Let's get it.
Yay. Okay, all right. So, what are we talking about? Obviously, if you've seen the title, I have a title in mind. It's probably going to piss you off. You probably clicked this video because you're pissed off. It is what it is. Here's the central contention of the argument, right? So, let's just get off on the outset. I don't personally hate Emu. I think Emu is a late stage villain that has been added that is kind of stealing a little bit of thunder from Blackbeard. I'm going to get into all the arguments that were made that I don't necessarily think hold a lot of water, but we'll get into it. But Emu can be salvaged if they are given the proper development that is needed for potentially an end stage, end of the series villain, right? Because that's the argument. They're introduced late. We almost know nothing about them. Obviously, their presence has ramped up a lot more in the final aspects of the story, particularly obviously in the most recent arc with Elbaf, particularly the most recent chapter. But prior to that, their presence was very little. And I've gone through and looked at where they appear every single panel, like up into where we are now. It really isn't that much. Like 50% of the time that we see Emu, they're like walking around a garden, like literally, right? Or we just see their eye or something like that. So when it comes to development, not a lot there. I mean, you can argue whether that's okay for a final villain, whether it's not. But really what we're doing is we're analyzing what makes a final villain good, right? And obviously we have some good examples, whether that's, Aizen in Bleach, or Madara in Naruto, or obviously Blackbeard, who we're going to talk about, or Muzan in case of Demon Slayer, or even Sukuna, right, in the case of Jujutsu Kaisen. So there are things that you look for, which is ultimately a connection to the main character in an antagonistic way that has been slowly kind of developed in order to build this confrontation up, which is ultimately satisfied in some kind of final conflict, right? That obviously culminates in the end of the series, right? Some final battle. But the only way for that to be truly effective, at least in my opinion, is for it to be properly developed. Otherwise, it just feels random, which, we mentioned this in the beginning of the video, Kaguya, which if you're even slightly aware of Naruto, that has been like what everybody hates about the series and how it ended. So I want to pause there. I want to get everybody's thoughts in relation to, just villains in general, how we feel about Emu, how we feel about Blackbeard. I want to get each of you guys' opinion before we really kind of dive in.
Yeah, I think that I was in agreement with you during that clip, and people were not exactly happy with what you had to say. But I understood the frame of reference, and I understood the broader conversation was at play. Like you mentioned, a 1 minute clip doesn't really do justice to the full extent of the conversation we were having and the context in which it was provided. And then I also feel like it's fair for us to have that feeling, even if we still don't know the full extent of Emu's character. We still don't know the completion of One Piece as a story. I think it's fair to have that sentiment in the current time to say, okay, well, how are we feeling about this particular character as we have received them thus far? And so I think when we assess Emu in that way, it's fair for us to say, okay, cool. We are working with a limited set of knowledge. We don't know what Emu will do in the future or how deeply integrated they will be, but we're just speaking to how we have received them thus far, how, it compares to other conflicts and other villains that we have assessed. And I genuinely feel as though you had a valid point to make. And I think that I am still a little bit on the side of I have hope for Emu. I would like them to be a good piece to the puzzle, and I have faith in Oda in executing on that, based on what he's shown us thus far. However, he's got a lot to clear up with Emu, in my opinion. So
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. My take on this is very similar. I mean, you put it nail on the head, Killa. It's like you need to have a connection to the character, and personally, I have no connection to Emu at all. And to even say like it's probably the most mysterious villain I've ever come across. So yeah, it's a big surprise. There's a lot of lore that's hidden in there, but the villain is connected to Joy Boy, so it's gonna have some lore drops. It's like Luffy doesn't even know what's going on, doesn't even know Emu even exists, and at this point, you have Blackbeard and Akainu who are directly related to breaking Luffy's heart by killing his brother, and one directly, one indirectly. Both of them are already insanely powerful, insane endgame villains, and I'm looking forward to them. And they're two of my like favorite characters, favorite villains, and their character models better than Emu's. Like, there's a lot of things. Like, I do like the idea of Emu and a big baddie, but the only way that I could see Emu coming forward with a win in this, if in some way it inflates one of the other villains. Blackbeard
Mm,
absorbed something with Emu,
mhm,
or even Emu puts down one of the baddies. But like by by no means is Luffy going to catch hands with all three of these guys. I would say Luffy gets one, and that's the case with Kaido, Big Mom. Like, there's so many different crews. There's so many moving allies and friendships out there in the world with all the world government, like all of Dragon Squad. Like, they're all making moves, and I just don't see Luffy going head to head with Emu. And the way that it's going now and how they've introduced Emu, I'm not going to give any spoilers, but it's really changing. And I'm sure we're going to touch on this more, but it's really changing the path of this story as far as like
yeah,
what we are to expect from power scaling, interactions. Like, my whole thing is Emu is amazing as like an idea, but
Mm.
I don't know how it's gonna come forward because right now the villains that were laid forth for me were amazing, and I hate to see anything taken away from them.
that was
Bash.
y'all spoiler alert.
Yeah, and that was really well
yeah,
well put. Bash, let's get your thoughts.
yeah. Those are some very valid points, Moogie. Um, but yeah, emu. Um, when I think about emu, I uh, I completely agree that Killer Cam has a valid point to the argument that emu is completely unnecessary to the storyline as of this point. To Wild and Freeze point, yes, we don't know what's happened yet. The story has yet to be written, so maybe we'll get some of those answers as the stories unfolds. We might even get more detail when we see the anime come out, and more animations of Emu. She's a very mysterious character. We don't even know what Emu is.
Mm.
On the other side of that, I like to think about both sides, both perspectives of the argument. And I think the only thing that would sway me with why Emu is necessary to the story would be that we've had Blackbeard as the biggest, um, most formidable foe, if you will, of Luffy's from the get. So he's like on the opposite end of the spectrum. The inverse of Luffy's story, if you will, is Blackbeard. So we get that. And now we're getting Emu, which is the enemy that Luffy and his crew must defeat. He must defeat them. That Emu is the enemy of the world government. So there's like a separation of the enemy of the pirates, which is Blackbeard, and then you have the enemy of the world government. So you're going above Akainu, you're going above all the admirals, you're going above the five elders, which is what we thought was Endgame. So maybe that's why it's necessary, because you get that side of the spectrum, but that would be the only thing that I would say would put it there for me. And then on a funny note, I did want to compare Emu to none other than Marvin the Martian. You put those two side by side, and there's a lot of similarities, man. Like,
That's
you know what I mean? If
That's
you think
hilarious.
about it, they're just kind of mysterious. The technological factor, you don't know if it's a girl or a boy. They're like genderless,
Yeah,
and they're like quiet, mysterious. You know, I just thought that was funny when I thought about Emu.
that's funny.
That's my little Emu take.
Okay. Well, let's dive in. I mean, I want to do this a little off the cuff. There's a lot, well, technically not really a lot, but there's a lot of technical kind of details. We can go through all the chapters in which Emu appears, but I just want to do broad strokes. So, here's the thing, right? So, one thing that I saw commonly within some of the pushback, right? And I do want to take a chance to steel man the argument, which is, what is Emu's role, right? Now, anybody would probably argue that's basically like a super Emu fan. They think that Emu is the, greatest villain that's going to be the end game, kind of antagonist, whatever. And their argument for that is, well, they connect us to the Void Century. We need a living person to connect us to the Void Century because, it's 800 years ago. The ancient kingdom was destroyed. The world government was formed from these 20 different kingdoms. And it makes sense to have like a leader above that. And that leader is really kind of, puppeteering or controlling the world. And we just don't know about it. That makes sense. And then I've even heard some arguments where it's like, well, it's really kind of close to the real world because the real world, like, I guess, it kind of assumes that the Illuminati is real. I'm not going to get into that. That's a separate video. But it's kind of playing on that like, oh, well, it's kind of like the Illuminati. And it's like, okay, let's just kind of remove that for a second. Let's just talk about in-world. And let's get back to the role that Emu plays. Okay, so question. Who else that we know that has been developed can tell us about the Void Century? Anybody just shout it out. Whatever you think.
Vegapunk, the Jarl maybe.
Yeah.
I'd say Rayleigh.
Robin.
Robin
is learning the history of the
Robin,
Void
yes.
Century through the poneglyphs. I mean, literally throughout the series, we have had flashbacks that are pretty much distinct from anybody actually telling the story. Sometimes we just get into a flashback for the sake of adding context to a moment. This happened many times in one. I mean, that's ultimately how we got the Odin flashback. There wasn't somebody telling that story to somebody else. We just transitioned into it. So the idea that we need a living person, right, to tell us the history of the Void Century, I think is unnecessary. I don't think that actually tracks. And then more specifically, even if you were going to make that argument, guess who else presumably knows the history of the Void Century? The Gorosei, who were introduced as early as like chapter 235, which was Jaya, by the way. So this is like really early on in the story. This is pre-time skip. This is before we even get to Skypiea, where you've introduced a shadowy council that works behind the scenes. This is introduced particularly like during the first Reverie, where you basically have this shadowy council of figures who are maneuvering behind the scenes and basically kind of controlling really the world, behind like closed doors, effectively.
Yeah, that's
that
when
is
we
the
got
exact
Blackbeard's intro too.
Yeah, it's like that is the exact same contention that people are making, that only Emu could fit that role. It's like, well, no, you had the 5 Elder Stars. And then more specifically, if you go back and look, which I did, if you go back and look at how did people feel and what did people think in chapter 906, which is when Emu, the actual silhouette figure, walks through the little cryogenic, steps or door or whatever room and finds the giant straw hat. Do you know what people were most interested about when they saw that? They were interested in the hat.
That big old
They
hat.
were just interested in the hat.
hat.
No one even thought like, oh, they thought there was like, Emu was like a servant or maybe like a celestial dragon, maybe even a king of the world government or whatever, but not this like, well, no, they're the devil. They're the ultimate evil. Like the only reason why people are even making that argument is because they're composing it against Sun God Nika via Luffy. Mm-hmm. So all of this is like retroactive headcanon where you're trying to kind of make the pieces fit, where it's like, no, we needed Emu to tell us about the Void Century, even though we had 5 figures that clearly ruled the world. And to be honest, if you go back and look at those chapters, didn't even appear like they reported to anybody higher than them. They were the people who actually ordered the destruction of Ohara and the killing of Clover. It was, I think it was either Saturn who specifically did it or the Walrus guy or whatever. But the point being is like, these were the people that back then people were thinking, okay, there's going to be a final matchup, obviously, with like against the Marines, against the world government. like the crew is gonna fight individual, like after the Blackbeard fires, they're gonna be fighting individual Elder Stars. But even when we had that like massive lore drop and like the teasing of Imu, no one thought that we needed like an ultra supreme villain kind of leader, right? They were just focused on the hat. They were wondering what the hat was able to do. They were thinking Joy Boy must have been a giant because the hat is so big. So this idea or this contention that people were waiting for an Imu-like character since the beginning because they had this inkling that somebody grander than the Elder Stars actually ruled the world is just incorrect. And again, you can look at the YouTube videos of Chapter 906, see what they were talking about, look at the comments, go on Reddit. Nobody was talking about this. And it's because, again, and this is a contention, nobody was really calling for an Imu-like figure. Again, getting back to the title, an unnecessary villain. Nobody asked for this.
I agree that no one was asking for like an
Yeah.
Emu-like character, but it's not a bad thing that she's introduced, and it's kind of like mysterious moment to just get another powerful being thrown into the mix.
That's true, and I get that argument. And don't get me wrong, I think that Imu can work, but
Right. That's what I was saying.
the issue with Kaguya specifically, and we're going to use Kaguya because, obviously, it arguably kind of ruined One Piece, or sorry, not One Piece, Naruto, or at least significantly diminished its legacy, is because it's just the question of, do you need an end stage villain, particularly if you aren't going to develop them in their relationship with the main character? Since we've seen Imu, and people will throw this around a lot, which is like, even when they were introduced in Chapter 906, we've known them for 10 years. You mean in real world time? Like, because that means nothing within the context of the series in relation to how they've been developed. Because they haven't been developed consistently over the 10 years. We've just known about them for 8 years, basically. But regardless, it's like, what is Imu's connection with Luffy? We're hopefully going to get that with an Elbaf. But right now, it's nothing. Luffy doesn't even know that Imu exists. Luffy, ironically, has way more of a connection, and so do the rest of the Straw Hats, and so does Bonnie, and so does Kuma, obviously, with the Gorosei via Saturn, right, who right now is dead, but whatever. They have way more of a relationship with the Gorosei. They've actually spoken to the Gorosei. The Gorosei knows who they are, and the Straw Hats know who the Gorosei are. That is a much tighter thematic connection in relation to an end-stage antagonist than currently what we have with Imu. Imu is, particularly since they're really getting active in this arc, somebody who's new, that doesn't know Luffy, knows Luffy. Luffy has no idea who Imu is. We're kind of getting this early juxtaposition of Luffy is like this preeminent savior, godlike figure, right, who's going to liberate the world. Okay, so now we need to kind of introduce them to the demon, devil, whatever of this world.
Well, the connection is just strictly Joy Boy.
Yes.
They're blowing that aspect of the story up between Imu, where like Imu's even like, oh, the hockey of Joy Boy. Like it's just gratifying this past Void Century thing, but we already have all the connection we need with Luffy and his villains.
Yeah.
I personally didn't feel like the Void Century like required any like living connection from then to now kind of dynamic. I think that with your explanation of like Robin being able to give that history, but also just the point that we made before about One Piece being of inherited wills, right? And seeing how greatly juxtaposed Blackbeard was to Luffy, it would have been really fascinating to maybe have a portion of a new arc that kind of dove a little bit more into like Blackbeard's ambitions and like maybe seeing some of the scenarios that revolve around him that are similar to what we got with Luffy, right? Because, take the Awakening of Gear 5, for instance, right? Like, Luffy is just recently knowing about what his own devil fruit is, right? Like, only when I think Saturn said it to him or something like that, like, he still didn't know. Like, he still says Gomu Gomu. He's just like, yeah, like, I have the rubber fruit. I don't know what y'all are talking about. But Vegapunk explained, oh, he's the sun god Nika. Others on Wano kind of revealed that history, but what if there was a similar situation for Blackbeard, right? Like, we don't know because we don't follow Blackbeard in the story that tightly, but we do have this history, in connection to him. We have seen his growth. We've seen the juxtaposition between how his story unfolds and how he is this kind of direct antithesis to Luffy. But maybe if we were to put the spotlight on him for just a brief moment, we would have gotten an exposure to that potential of deeper connections to the Void Century that could have been handled very well without the presence of Imu, right? So that's kind of aiding to your point again. It's like Imu in and of themselves were not required to validate or bring context to the Void Century.
Yeah, and I think people kind of underestimate what is in character for exposition. Like, we get a little bit of exposition when Imu is talking to Cobra in the throne room, and it's kind of like, oh, here's this empty throne. It's introduced to us. I'll pull up the exact chapter. It's introduced to us in 908. This is when we hear Imu's name for the first time. The Gorosei kneel to Imu, who is sitting on this empty throne, which has been basically kind of explained to us that once the 20 kingdoms all aligned themselves and began to basically just kind of form the world government, they said no one king is going to be above the other, right? Yeah. So we're going to leave this throne empty. And obviously it's an homage to Game of Thrones, right? Then we see the introduction of like Imu, I guess technically by name, because we'd seen them before in silhouettes. They walk up, they sit down, and then we see the Gorosei kneel, right? Later on we get, this moment with Cobra, and Cobra is basically kind of giving us, as well as Imu is kind of speaking to the history of the Nefertari family, particularly Nefertari Lily, right? Who kind of like broke away or betrayed the original 20 kingdom kind of alliance back when they were against the ancient kingdom. And, that they are effectively D-members, right? That is a good lore drop. But here's the thing, even within that context, like Imu plans to kill Cobra like right in that moment. Now, obviously we get Sabo who's eavesdropping, which seems like it's kind of weird that nobody could sense him with their hockey, but whatever. Mm-hmm. Sabo's there. Walpole is also looking through, and we can presume hearing, but can see through like a wall or something like that. But the point being is like, I don't know what people are expecting in relation to Imu is so secretive that if somebody sees them or, has a conversation with them that is not a part of this like inner circle of Gorosei, they're going to get killed, right? That is explicitly said it. Like, as soon as you walked in here, you were bitten, like saw Imu, like you're going to die, basically. And even Sabo, who goes to Lelucia Kingdom, gets that entire island destroyed just because, Imu believes that they could be there, right? So the idea that we're going to get any kind of direct exposition about the Void Century from Imu, I think is foolish. Like, we're probably going to get that through Robin because that is her purpose, to uncover the secrets of the world, not getting it from the villain, right? Now, maybe we might get some, but again, that is going to invalidate Robin's role, which is to tell us what happened, particularly as like an O'Haran sole survivor who were, within the context of them being destroyed, were getting ready to elucidate the history of the ancient kingdom and this war with the 20 governments of the world government, or 20 kingdoms of the world government. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't think that is necessarily a good argument that, like, again, we need Imu to tell us about the Void Century. They've been here from the beginning. No, they haven't. Moogie, go ahead, and then I want to talk about...
I just raised my hand.
Yeah,
no, I was going to go off something that you said. Yeah, it's a pencil. Taking notes over here.
Speaking stick.
No, I do think there is a place for Imu. And if there was like a mistake I didn't want anyone to misunderstand what I was saying. Like, I do think Imu has a place, and it's like we have the past and we have Joy Boy, and Joy Boy was this super powerful deity, like happy, like amazing being, but like Joy Boy lost, and there's a part of that story where like, how did Joy Boy lose? And we're introduced to this character and given all these powers and all these things where we're like, okay, now we're starting to really think about, I could see how Joy Boy lost and like who this character is. But the idea that this character is the final villain makes like, it just cannot pan out for me in my head because of the missing connection with Luffy to the character. Yes. Like, that is Joy Boy's character. We're going to learn about the history, and there's a reason Joy Boy lost, and we're going to learn about what actually happened there. We might get an insane reveal with who Imu is and all this stuff.
It's Luffy's mom.
it's like it could be some crazy stuff. But as far as Luffy fighting that villain in the end would be like an incredible disservice to like the power of Blackbeard and Akainu. I know I kind of like skipped
No,
back
no, you're
there,
good.
Yeah.
but I
Yeah.
No,
do
that makes
believe
sense.
that Imu has a purpose, and we're
Yeah.
learning about it. But I think people are misunderstanding like the depth of it.
No, I agree. I mean, I
Agree.
spoke to it a little bit at the end of our last episode when we initially started talking about Emu. But I was like, hey, what if Blackbeard pulls up and he kind of Pac-Man ghosts Emu? You know what I'm saying? Just like
Yeah.
bloop bloop bloop.
That'd be great.
Take
Yeah.
that up, you know?
Yeah.
So
That would pipe her down
potential
real
is there.
quick, or him, or her,
Yeah,
whatever it is.
whatever it
Or
is.
whatever it is.
But
Right?
that's it. I mean,
Yeah. So
yeah.
Kirby, straight up Kirby. Her.
and if that's the case, that's purpose, right? That's
Yeah.
purpose in the story because it
Yeah,
does.
I think people would be
elevate.
pissed off by that. Like, I agree with you. I would
love-
like to see. I
would
mean,
love that.
like, you just threw Emu in. I think it would be call it a subversion of expectations, even though I hate that phrase, to basically kind of just delete them and like empower Blackbeard. I think that'd be nice. But I don't know. I mean, yeah. And I'm sure people would like kind of tap dance around like why that actually made sense and why we didn't need Emu in the first place. But I do want to focus on thematically the difference between Blackbeard and their development and what we're seeing from Emu, because that's really kind of what we're talking about, right? If there was no Blackbeard, I think everybody would be like, okay, we got a final villain, cool, Emu. Like eventually we'll see them, we'll eventually be able. We're seeing what they can do now. It seems like an interesting kind of pair up between our main character Luffy, who again is this almost Christ-like savior of the world kind of figure, versus this ultimate evil, vis-a-vis Emu. However, thematically, at least in my opinion, Blackbeard is just so much more interesting. Not only has he been
Yes.
developed way earlier
He
on,
really is.
but when you talk about like this perfectly set up foil for the Straw Hats, what do the Straw Hats represent, particularly through Luffy? Luffy represents basically a desire to attain power for the sake of freedom, right? He wants to be strong enough so that he can do whatever he wants, and he wants other people to also be able to do what they want to do, right? Obviously within like an altruistic means. Like,
Yep, freedom and liberation.
yes, like liberation versus conquest, whereas like, kind of Emu and Luffy are like really kind of good versus evil, right? You can also make the argument of like liberation versus maybe control or domination. There's similar
Yeah.
themes, but I do think that Blackbeard works better. One, because Blackbeard and the way that he's attained power has been interesting, and a lot of people have talked about this. Blackbeard has attained power through effectively like corruption, scandal, like evil kind of machinations, very immoral. Obviously, he kills somebody to steal their fruit, right? Like just literally stabs his quote unquote like brother, because he's a part of the Whitebeard pirates at this point, in order to take his fruit, right? After that, every move that he makes is extremely calculated in relation to, I'm going to go kill Luffy, right? He says this, or he has intentions to do this. It's Ace who kind of more or less kind of ascertains this, that he was going to go after Luffy. Again, Ace is in this case avenging Thatch. But that was really kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back. He goes after Blackbeard. Blackbeard attacks him, basically jumps him, like with all of his crew, and then sends him to impale down. I'm not going to go through everything that Blackbeard does, but there is a pattern of Blackbeard achieves, whether it's political power, becoming a Shichibukai, or in relation to what he's trying to do now, which is like get like sovereign status for Hachinosu, but whatever. Blackbeard is maneuvering in an immoral fashion in order to kind of attain power effectively through conquest. Luffy attains power through sheer will, through sheer grit. You can make the argument of his devil fruit is special. He's a chosen one. He's got this like 1 in a million Kakurasaki. He's great, whatever, right? But I would argue, and I think most people would agree, Luffy's earned everything that he's done. Even to awaken the Gomu Gomu no Mi, people laughed at it. They thought it was a stupid fruit, right? Whereas like Blackbeard steals one of the most renowned devil fruits. It has a little weakness to it, but is also really strong in that it can cancel out devil fruits. The way that they've achieved power has been parallel, but completely separate and different, right? And again, it's been developed since, Blackbeard's introduction in Jaya. That, to me at least, right, is more thematically interesting in relation to both of them want to achieve power, but for completely separate ends, one being conquest, one being liberation. Is so much more interesting and again, like developed in the long term, right? Like arguably plus 20 years. than what is currently being set up with Luffy and Imu, and Luffy doesn't even know who Imu is, right? So
Yeah.
yeah,
I
go ahead
want
and
to
jump
say
in.
that Blackbeard parallels Luffy so well, not because their goals are so different, but because they are so similar,
Yes.
right? Like when you think about Blackbeard's ambitions, they are technically very much in a way still freedom, but it's the freedom of chaos, you know? And it's that freedom of like do whatever you want, you know, pillage, like use power to achieve your ends and the means that you want to see in this world. But that the way that those two ambitions are intertwined is what makes their dynamic so fascinating
It's
because we
like Batman
know,
and the Joker.
yeah, yeah,
Yep,
yeah,
yep.
That's a
exactly.
good analogy.
Well, I mean, even still, you have like, and I didn't mean to cut you off, but I want to throw this
No, you're
in.
good.
You have the sun versus darkness. End story. You got it. Like you have the
Exactly.
perfect thematic binary. With Emu, you basically just have like what, God versus the devil. It's like okay, like
Yeah,
it's kind
and
of
to your
less
point, I mean, he's
interesting.
Emu to this point. What we know is just so pure evil that it is kind of boring in that way,
Yeah.
right? Not to say that it like Emu's character in and of itself is not boring only because of the fact that there is mystery surrounding them, right? Like if Emu kept talking in Elbaf right now and they were just like, yeah, like I just want to be X, Y, and Z, like I want to have the whole world in my palm, and that was their only ambition, and that was just the end of their mystery, that would be pretty boring, in my opinion, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
in the way that Emu shows up in just this pure evil kind of way, I think that speaks to why we kind of feel the way that we do about him because there's so much nuance in Blackbeard's character, right? Like the fact that he traveled with some of our favorites and was close to Shanks and, you know, these kinds of things really help to provide a sense of gray to Blackbeard's character versus Emu and Luffy's very black and white, you know?
And just one thing to add on that real quick, and I want to get somebody else to jump in. You mentioned Shanks. Shanks is like one of the most interesting because of their mystique figures in the entire world of One Piece. Obviously, we start the story with them. Every time we see them, they are in awe of Luffy. They're watching kind of over him from a distance, obviously like a clear kind of mentor, you know, Obi-Wan Kenobi kind of role where like every single thing that Luffy does, his achievements, you know, you kind of get this flash over to Shanks who is like reflecting on how far Luffy has come. And I underscore that because obviously Shanks is important, but the only other thing that Shanks seems to be interested in, other than the growth and development of Luffy, is the growth and development of Blackbeard. So clearly from the start, like Blackbeard has been set up to be this looming existential threat that even Shanks sees before anybody else, before Whitebeard, before the world government, before, in this case, the Marines in relation to Marineford. Shanks is the only person who's like, you know, kind of alerting the world, right, or at least anybody who will listen to this dangerous element that is Blackbeard. Blackbeard heating up. Blackbeard cooking, right? Getting ready to be a major threat who, you know, obviously his rise has just been as prolific as Luffy's in relation to reaching Yonko status and having a very strong and like pretty tight-knit crew. So I don't know. I mean, it's one of those things where again we get to the development of Blackbeard and like this really intricate kind of parallel that has been created, and then again we compare that to maybe Imu is not the final villain. Maybe they're just an important villain. I mean, they're kind of being set up to be final just because the world government is like the ruling dominating force, but maybe they're not. But it just seems to be so much less development, which makes them, Mr. Waterfree, to your point, fundamentally less interesting to watch.
Yeah, I agree with that point. I mean, I would say that Blackbeard is definitely the better enemy, just because we know him more and we can see his storyline, and Emu just kind of being this mysterious force. She just feels like an optional enemy at this point in the story. That being said, you know, I'm banking on Oda hoping hoping that he kind of hits a home run with it, because if it's not some sort of devil fruit power that she has that we're witnessing at this point in the storyline, it's going to be a weird dynamic. Um, you know, as we've talked about in the past with the power levels of One Piece, we already took a deep dive into hockey, um, and before that, kind of the differences between hockey and devil fruits. But if there was to be a third thing that we don't know about that we're introducing late in the end game, it would kind of be a little weird of a vibe.
Moogie, what
So
about you, man? You got any thoughts?
I do have thoughts. I think as far as Emu goes, I think there's still a chance that Oda gives us some awesome backstory, brings it back into play, you know, like shows that it is a devil fruit, makes sense of all of it. Something I really do enjoy if I want to play a pro to it,
Sure.
because I feel like we're kind of bludgeoning Emu right now, which is fine. I'm not like a huge fan of the character. I haven't been given much yet.
Sure.
There's some cool things and lore is ahead, but one of my favorite things about it is I'm getting to see, like, from a fan of Luffy, people fearing Luffy like heavily, and people like Luffy doesn't know about them as much as we don't know about them. We don't know that much about Emu and the God's Knights. We're starting to learn about them. Luffy doesn't know about them, but they know and are tracking Luffy now, and they're like
right,
starting to talk about him with every conversation, and they've been bringing it forward in Elbaf heavily, where they're like Gunko. There's a point where like Gunko, when Summers asked her what her greatest fear was, she was probably at that moment a little bit manifested of Emu, and Emu answered, "Joy Boy is my biggest fear." Because or it could have been Gunko as well. That's a little bit of headcanon, but like,
I thought it was Nika, but same.
Yeah, it's
or
Nika.
Nika, yeah,
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
no, yeah, that's and then they're kind of putting respect on Luffy's name, and Luffy is coming forward as this like pretty scary entity to them. I'm really enjoying seeing that as far as the epic mystique of Luffy now. But yeah, I have a lot of high hopes for no, I have hopes for Emu. They're not like, I don't think that much crazy stuff's going to happen. I think it's going to be all related to the Void Century, and I think that she's going to be a stepping stone, or they're going to be a stepping stone some kind of way. But yeah, that's what I got there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree. I mean, there's still story left, right? I think that's kind of what we're getting at, which is like there is still time to define, this very deep relationship between Luffy and between Emu if they are going to be, the final villain. We just kind of need to get that activated. And, to Oda's credit, introducing Emu directly into the story at this point might be an attempt to do that. I'm sure that we will get Luffy interacting with Emu vis-a-vis when he comes up from the underworld. If Gunko's still there, hopefully Emu doesn't like retreat from possessing her body, because to me that would be pretty frustrating if there still isn't this meeting between Luffy and Emu at this point. I would personally like to see, and we've talked about this already, like Emu doing something that is like so critical and affecting to Luffy that it really kind of creates this like true sort of antagonistic relationship or dynamic, right? Vendetta, if you will, between Luffy and Emu. And I think that would take place as like Emu potentially killing one of the Straw Hats. We'll have to see.
Ooh.
My vote for that would be Usopp, of course, because it's a good moment. Not for real. It would be a good moment for him to do. Nah, okay, all right.
It would be Usopp,
Okay,
of course.
Tell me this wouldn't work.
Why not Chopper?
Tell me this wouldn't, because he's a doctor. But tell me this wouldn't work. Usopp needs to have a moment in this arc. He needs to have a moment where he can show that he is a brave warrior of the sea. People have been speculating that because Usopp's the most normal guy, and to be honest, he's kind of like useless. He doesn't really have a role in the crew anymore. That his role would be to like be the straw hat that dies and ultimately raises the stakes of this world. Now we'll see. I don't think it's going to happen, because Usopp's just
it's a
too
big
big of a character.
too.
Yeah, I mean,
Nah.
if Oda won't even kill like Pound, I don't think that Usopp's going to go. But we'll see. But either way, I mean,
Usopp don't have the balls, man.
the point, right, is like there is more story left to be developed, and obviously, like I said, Oda is getting very active with Emu, which is good, and we need more of that, and we need, again, like specifically a direct connection between Luffy and Emu. But I guess I will say this. I think the fundamental question I do want to pose it to you guys is like, what is the point or the focus of the story? Because I feel like it has shifted dramatically in the second half, which I would argue is the focal point of One Piece post time skip is the idea of liberation and liberating the world from tyranny, right? Even if they're not aware of it, right? That's the reason why Imu is being set up. It's the reason why Luffy has been positioned to be this grand liberator, this historic, god figure, whatever. Whereas I would argue that the pre-time skip was really about will, inherited will from generations, and basically achieving one's dreams. Like the importance of maintaining into pursuing what makes people live or want to live, right? Like that aspect of dreams is such an integral aspect of particularly the dynamic between Luffy and Blackbeard, because it defines both of them. Blackbeard has that great speech to Luffy about the importance of dreams and never letting somebody mock them, where I do really love that dynamic. And I think maybe it's just a softer side of One Piece where you had more of like introspective interactions, particularly with the crew. A lot of people will feel nostalgic watching just the crew hang out on the ship, whereas like we've kind of gone into almost kind of hyper shonen within the post time skip, where like it really is like Avengers Endgame, where everybody comes out and it's a big battle or whatever over effectively like someone trying to take over the world. So I don't know. I mean, I want to pose that to you guys. I mean, where do you guys think like the central theme of the story is these days?
Yeah, I would agree to the most part. I would say that you have that element of like liberating the world from tyranny, but then you have all of these extra ingredients, right? You're effectively weapons of mass destruction,
Yeah.
the repeated cycles of history, and the inherited will of those who have influence over the world.
Yes. Anybody else?
Yeah. I would say that originally to me it was about One Piece. It was about treasure. It was about Luffy's willpower, like the adventure and quest of the Straw Hats. Like it was just more simple and pure. And to me, along with everything we've talked about, Emu and all of the world government stuff and just like lore and the reveals, I feel like it's turned into like a story about the revealing of like truth or bringing back the way that things should have been. Like there's some kind of like warping of like the truth of the world, and even I think One Piece is in the end of like part of that, like bringing everything back to that the way it should have always been or the way it was, and revealing the truth, and that is what's going to be liberating everybody. But it's gone a lot further away from just like becoming Pirate King and doing all that stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of the operative word, right? Of like the Pirate King. Obviously, Luffy says it a lot, but it just none of the crew talk about their dreams anymore. It seems kind of like almost like a secondary thing. Like becoming the Pirate King has almost kind of become secondary to like I think what many fans believe is the ultimate goal, which is to destroy the Red Line and liberate the world. I mean, we'll just have to kind of see. But one last question for you guys, and then we'll get out of here. What do you guys want to see from Imu in relation to like their development, whether it's in Elbaf, just in general? What do you think is kind of missing to? We've already talked about this a little bit, but I want to get you guys' thoughts. Like, what's next? What's the ideal kind of development for Imu and for Luffy?
I'm gonna give.
Go
I'll
ahead.
start. I'll give my take on the last question too, real quick, about where we are currently.
Yeah.
In One Piece, I think that's an important question because I think we're at a weird, nervous point as fans of the story. And when I say that, I mean that we know we're in some sort of end game with the storyline, right? And we've all grown up with One Piece. I mean, this has been going on for decades, right? I mean, we started the story when we were in high school. Some of us were in high school, some of us were older, some of us were younger. For me personally, this has been going on, since I was in high school. And One Piece has got me through a lot of things, man. Through some sad times, some good times, some happy times, man. I threw on that laptop back in the day, and I'd watch some One Piece, and it would make me feel so good, man. That original storyline, that pre-time skip, the
Soundtrack.
theme songs to the anime, the songs, the characters. It just felt good. And right now we're grown up. It's been years later. The story is different. The characters have developed. So we're at a weird point. We don't know what's going to happen, but we know there's an end, and we know that the end's coming soon. And that may feel a little different for us at this point. So yes, we're critical of Oda right now because he's got such a huge burden on his hands right now, is to wrap this great masterpiece up that we all love so much. So I think it's difficult, but I think we got to give him the benefit of the doubt, and just appreciate what we've gotten up until this point thus far. Because no matter what happens, man, if it ends with a bang or if it ends with some BS, it was a great ride.
Oh, dude,
Right.
Sure, yeah.
And
absolutely.
that's all I got to say. And
No,
I'm
it's the best.
excited for the story to come and what's going to happen with Emu. And I'm happy to discuss Emu with you, all of you people in the comments, and my buddies here.
All right.
So that's my thoughts.
Who else?
Excellent. Very, very well said, Bash. Agree with it and share the sentiment. I think that Emu absolutely has room for growth here, right? Like, we can get everything, not even that we want out of Emu, but more than what we could ever expect from Emu, right? And I think Oda has the potential, not even just the potential, but the history and the experience and the legacy to execute on that. To execute on that, excuse me. And so I think that I would like to see Emu have some level of nuanced ambition, right? And understanding, like, maybe the point in which they might have turned to evil, or what kind of caused them to be the way that they are. I think having that kind of nuanced detail and understanding of their character would help to reinforce them. But then, of course, we would also need something to directly up the stakes as to why Emu and the Straw Hats need to be in direct conflict, right? And then, of course, we don't know if that's actually going to be the case. It could very well be our boy Kobe, right?
That's funny.
Yeah, Kobe.
Hero of the
You know?
Marines, yes.
So yeah, I'm just overall excited to see how this unfolds. I'm not critical to the point of diminishing my love for One Piece. Echoing Bash's sentiments, this has been a journey that we have been on for many years now, and so regardless of how it ends and regardless of how this unfolds, One Piece is always going to have a major, special place in my heart.
Yeah,
Certainly.
Sure.
I'm to go off what Bash said. Yeah, One Piece is the best thing that's ever happened to me as far as anime, And
It's the
you
greatest
bring these
timeline.
questions forward about Emu, about anything, all of us, we're gonna like dive deep into the conversation. But by no means are we expecting anything that's gonna like let our hearts break or anything like that. Like this is the best run ever. As far as what I want from Emu and what I expect is, I want like a really good backstory and reveal of the character. I don't think I'm going to be satisfied if it's a silhouette the whole time. I think they're
Mm.
coming out with a action figure, a collectible that's, it's like a crazy silhouette, like what we knew when they were on the throne. And I was kind of like, ooh, if it's just a silhouette, that's gonna make me sad. But I want to see like good backstory, maybe some new characters and the interactions with like all of like the D Clan and like Joy Boy back in the day. A lot of the void, like as what we expect. I want all of the lore to come forward through Emu if that's Emu's role. I'd like to see like some crazy fights with Emu, and if anything, if this is going to follow along the lines of like a shonen and a character like Luffy, like maybe Emu is, instead of the character that's getting defeated and killed and like thrown off the map, it's someone that ends up finally becoming like a believer or like switching their mindset or something based off of like Luffy's willpower. Finally, I think that's a tall order, and I think that's kind of like cliche, but I think that would fall in line with the like polarity of both characters and how in the past maybe whatever caused Emu to become so evil gets flipped on its head and things change. But yeah, I'm hoping for a good backstory and a lot of lore reveal.
I mean, I agree. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, obviously we've said this before, but like, there is still runway for Emu, but I think what everybody is kind of feeling and hoping is not the case, and that is the reason why we're looking for more development, is because if Emu is presented as just the ultimate evil with no kind of motivations that maybe one can understand, and the relationship with Luffy is almost absent, that's going to be kind of unsatisfying if they are the final villain. If they just represent like the ultimate evil without really any kind of deeper characterization, even a backstory, a flashback, or whatever, as to maybe how they got to that place, it's just really not going to be that interesting. It's kind of paint by numbers. Jedi versus the Sith. I mean, they're always evil. There's no kind of moral ambiguity. It's going to be a little unsatisfying, and I think really kind of what we're getting at as well is like focus, right? So right now, the reason why Blackbeard, aside from their development or whatever, is such a perfectly positioned villain is because we hate them. I hate Blackbeard. He got Ace killed, like has gone against Luffy or tried to come against Luffy, killed Whitebeard in like, this dastardly kind of underhanded way, has like a crew that is actively hunting, or at least were actively hunting Devil Fruit users to kill them and to steal their Devil Fruits. They are completely informed.
Took out Law.
The sickest thing.
Took out Law,
also.
like completely
Just killed that
informed
man.
in relation to how to get
so
Pluton,
scary.
like is probably on their way to Wano, has kidnapped Pudding, understands and knows the power of Shirahoshi as Poseidon. I mean, it just goes on and on, where it's like they are such a looming threat that maybe this is intentional by Oda, that he's kind of misdirecting us, hopefully, into focusing on Emu, and maybe, Blackbeard gets some more time to kind of percolate. But we hate them. And that is the reason why it will feel so satisfying to watch Luffy take out Blackbeard, the same way it was so satisfying to watch him punch a Celestial Dragon. Right now, in the story, if Luffy were to like go head to head with Emu, just as things are the way they are right now, just Brogy and Dory have been turned evil, whatever, no one's really been seriously hurt or killed, it's not really going to feel that satisfying because there is not a serious connection between Luffy and Emu. So that's what we need. We need a connection between those two, and ideally some kind of clear motivation that makes us understand Emu. Because the other thing that I think no one's really kind of reflecting on is like, yeah, I mean, the world's a little corrupt, but like, how bad is the world itself right now? It seems like it's got a functioning Marine Corps that like at least tries to take out pirates. The world government, is a little corrupt in relation to some islands and the way they treat people or whatever, but like things kind of hum along. And for the most part, the reason I say that is because the average citizen in this world doesn't really even see that anything is amiss. We learned that firsthand through watching people's reactions to Vegapunk's recording, right? Like they're just like,
And all the news drops too, and like the villages.
they're all pretty
weren't really-
uninformed. Like, they think that Luffy is evil because he's a pirate, and like Vegapunk must be telling the truth because he's the smartest guy in the world and all this kind of stuff. Like, the average person in the world of One Piece really has no idea what's going on, and for the most part, like, aside from dealing with evil pirates and maybe corrupt Marines, they kind of live like a regular life. So
Yeah, up until the Lelouch incident.
That's true.
When
Yeah.
the quake started to hit the rest of the world. Yeah.
that's true. But I'm not saying that as like as a positive for Emu, but I guess like the question of what is Emu doing right now? I mean, they're trying to basically keep the world humming in their favor and prevent the exposure of certain news that might throw the world into chaos, right?
Mm-hmm.
Outside of that, they're really not doing anything. They're not actively like, I mean, again, genocides aside, when they blow up a kingdom because, they could be harboring a criminal, things kind of just operate the way that they want them to, but they're not entirely disruptive. That's my point. So I think we need to learn what Emu wants, what they're trying to maintain, particularly since, they seem to be from the Void Century and are almost 1,000 years old. What is their goal? What is their aim? What are they trying to maintain outside of just dominance and control? So, I don't know.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts? We're like right at
long-winded.
time. That's crazy.
That's right at time, baby.
Okay.
Right on time, Moogie.
Right on
All right.
time.
It has been Anime Parlay. We hope that you enjoyed the discussion. Obviously, like, comment, subscribe. If you mess with us. Yeah, I mean, like I said, we really kind of get into these topics because we enjoy the conversation. Obviously, we love One Piece. We've been following it since forever, right? And we are firmly invested in the way that the story develops. We trust Oda. We expect great things from him. but at the same time, like, we have invested a large portion of our lives into this, right? And basically, I don't know, we like to see and to comment on how things are evolving, good or bad, and there's good and bad in everything. So we'll see what happens with Emu. It is relatively early to say like Emu's completely trash. I mean, we'll see how it develops, but I do think fundamentally we didn't need Emu. We got Emu. Let's see if it pays off, but we'll see what happens. All right, but anyways, it's your boy Killer Cam. I'll let the rest of the crew give their sign-offs.
Peace and blessings, y'all. It's your boy, Mr. Wild and Free. And no walking today, so no miles.
Yeah,
No
just
miles.
No miles.
Sorry.
nice.
Yo, it's Moogie Mike. Later, y'all.
Hey, yo, Bash Ketchum. God bless y'all, man. We out of here.
Okay, all right. We'll see you next time. Peace.